Do you remember being a kid? Some kids might have stayed behind and they remember. They're living it right now. You know that Christmas feeling that is just unbelievable joy? Such excitement that you just can't stand it. 23 days left. How are we going to wait that long for something this exciting? You know those Advent calendars that we had that have one door for every day of December, and then you pull the piece of candy out one by one? For adults, Advent is a little different than that. Not just because of the busyness of the time, but also because waiting is different for us. We understand it differently. And this time of year, we come face to face with how hard life can be. The weather is really demonstrating symbolically what life is sometimes like. A little bit darker every day than the day before. No real sign of us going in a good direction. I mean, it's barely daylight now, mid-morning. And it's dark at 4:30. And here's what's so hard. It's not getting any brighter. Oh. Amen. All right, we're going to get the sound system turned back on, and we'll make sure the feed is still on, and then we'll come back. As I was saying, right before the Italy trip, I wound up having a little snag. It started off with nothing. I had just a painful finger one day. One morning I was making breakfast and I thought, oh, my thumb hurts. But by nighttime, it was throbbing. And there was a red line starting to form. And I thought, that's not good. But I didn't worry that much. I just thought, well, how bad could it be? It just started. So I went to emergent care and thought that they would say, oh, soak it. Or here's some Neosporin. But they didn't. Instead, they said, wow, that is a pretty serious thumb infection. And hand infections are always pretty serious, they said. You have to be really careful. You need to make sure that's treated right away. And I said, well, can you help me? Because I'm going to Italy. And they said, when? I said, 2 days. They said, you may not be going to Italy. You need to go to the ER right now. The ER. So that day was my day off. And I had planned to stay busy all afternoon with tasks getting ready for the trip. But I had one fun thing planned. And that was lunch with my friend Joan, who's a campus minister at the College of St. Rose in Albany. So I thought, the ER is not going anywhere. Maybe I'll just go to lunch, and then I'll go to the ER. I mean, it could be a couple hours, so I might as well get a good meal in. And that's what I did. And then maybe I'll let Joan pick up the story from there.
Good morning. The story, yes. So when Father Scott mentioned he was going to the ER, I had just recently been at the ER with my stepfather and mother over a very serious situation, and I was aware that can feel like a very long wait on your own, that you're there for a while and it's worrisome, and that maybe it would help to have a friend. So I said I'd go, and Father Scott said, no, you don't want to spend your day off here, but kind of uncharacteristically, I didn't have anything else on the schedule, and I thought, well, I could go, and we agreed we'd play it by ear. However long it was okay to be there, I'd stay, and then I was close enough to home that I could get home if I needed to after that. So there we were in the ER, and he went into the desk to sign in, and I walked back into the waiting area, and that's when I started to get kind of anxious, because it was a big waiting area and it was absolutely full of people, in all different states of serious situations of illness, of people with masks and bags and blankets, and others like laying across chairs, and people in the hallway. And I thought, we're going to be here for a while.
When I left the registration desk, I wound up coming around the corner to find Joan, and then I took it all in too. And these are some of the things that I saw. I saw a woman in her 20s in the fetal position, clutching her stomach. She couldn't sit up, so she was trying to sit around an armrest on a chair, laying on her side, just moaning, waiting for someone to come get her. I saw a middle-aged woman who was covered with fresh scrapes and bruises and was wearing a neck brace. And I could only assume that that meant that she had just gotten into a car accident or something, and they were doing tests and waiting for the results to see how serious her injuries were.
I saw a couple of men in prison garb with shackles and in wheelchairs in a lot of pain, along with guards attending them. I saw a pregnant woman in her pajamas and flip-flops with a baby, and her partner who looked like maybe they had left the house in a hurry. I saw a trio of people who looked like they may not have had English as their first language, and they had a serious injury, who at one point just got up and left because they had been waiting there for so long. And so this was a waiting room. This was the scene. It wasn't a cafe or a coffee house or a lobby or a clubhouse. It was a waiting room. And all of that we saw there, with its being uncomfortable and full of germs and chaos and people in very dire and distressing situations.
And that is where we spent 9 hours that day. Maybe you've had it worse than that. I know there's some ER stories out there. 9 hours. And if you spend that long in a place, you're going to run into people that you know. Joan wound up seeing a student from the College of St. Rose who was there with her own crisis. But listen, I did tell this at home. Let me just say, I said, Joan, you are a blue ribbon friend. Okay, hour 2, you win the prize. Hour 5, you go to platinum level. You don't have to stay here any longer. But she kept wanting to be there with me and just see how this played out and support me.
At about hour 7, I said, should you check to see if we're still on that list? Because I haven't heard from anybody in a while.
And it was my thumb. It was just my thumb.
Probably midway through, I had a sense there's an Advent homily in here about waiting somewhere in this story that we're living here today. So.
Absolutely. And you know, as you looked at the surface of the people in the room, we had nothing in common. We didn't go together at all. But that day we did, because all of us were in some form of crisis. All of us were ill. All of us had a problem that we could not solve on our own. And all of us were looking for some kind of hope. And here was what was so frustrating. You know how when you're in a waiting area at the DMV or in a doctor's office, you kind of gauge when your turn is coming up by the progress of others? Well, here's why that doesn't work. Because every time you'd say, oh, I think I might be next, or maybe I'm just third now. We're getting there. Then another ambulance would come in. And you would wind up getting triaged down the list. And of course, that's the way it's supposed to work. That's the way it has to work. But it doesn't mean that it wasn't frustrating. And that's why, at one point, a man who had been there before we got there, who was very uncomfortable and sitting there a long time, couldn't take it anymore, and he blew his lid.
We'd been there a couple hours at that point, but had been watching him for a while, pacing around, looking really frustrated and agitated. And then at that point, he just had it when they called the next person and it wasn't him. And he started just yelling, this is ridiculous. When is it going to be my turn? I've been here all day. No one cares what's going on with me. My problems are important too. And it was this whole thing. And the staff people throughout the day were just beautiful with people at the hospital. But we were all in this very unimaginable situation of distress and pain and seriousness, and they were doing all they could do, but it often wasn't enough, especially for this man. And it was scary, and it felt dangerous, not just for him, but who else might be next? Who else might get to the breaking point of their frustration and pain? And as much as we could be afraid, we also understood.
There was one point where Joan turned to me and said, I can't help but thinking that the theme today has been everybody's pain. She said it's kind of like everyone here is saying, my pain is real, and I know everyone else has pain too, but when is someone going to care about my pain? When is my pain going to matter to someone? And you could see that there, and you could feel it. All of us were struggling. And I think that that's what the waiting of Advent is really like. In the darkest time of the year, where we say, God, it feels like things are going in the wrong direction. Life is not as I thought it would be. And it feels like it's getting worse, not better. When are you going to show your face in the midst of all of this? When are you going to intervene and turn this around? When are you going to address this thing that I can't handle on my own? And that's what we heard in the readings today. The prophet Jeremiah was writing during a horrible time in the history of the Jewish people. They had just been conquered by an enemy power, and the enemy power destroyed all of their holy places. Their temple was torn down to the ground. Imagine if all of the parishes and the cathedral and St. Peter's Basilica were all destroyed in the same event. They were devastated by it. And on top of that, their country was invaded and their government was taken over, and they were kicked out. They were put into exile into a foreign country. They were completely degraded and depleted, and they had no hope, and there was not one sign that things were going to get better or turn around. And that is the group that Jeremiah was talking to when he said, hold on. The days are coming, says the Lord, when all of the promises I have made will be fulfilled. But you need to hold on and trust that I will bring safety and security back to you and your land. And that is what we saw in the waiting room. People needed to find a way to persevere because they could get the help no other way. There was no other place to go. They needed what the emergency room had to offer. But to get to it, they were going to need patience and faith and perseverance.
So what we saw in that waiting room, people wondering when was their pain going to matter, brought up to us these promises of Advent, of a God who sees our pain, sees it's real, wants us to know it matters, and is no longer satisfied with us thinking God is witnessing it from a distance. But God is going to come here and live it with us, to let us know that our pain matters so much that God will become one with it, that God cares.
Advent is the time that we wait for that. This is the waiting room. That's why we light one candle at a time. It would be beautiful in the dark time of year to light all of them, but we can't rush it. We have to allow God to reveal all of these promises according to God's schedule. And that's uncomfortable. So what do? Instead of making Advent a waiting room, we turn it into a Christmas room. I've got my red sweater all set for the open house in Coxsackie today because they're having an event there called Advent by the River. Just kidding. It's called Christmas by the River because that's what we always do. We make it Christmas time already, and we eat and shop and play the music, but that's not what this time is about. This is the time of waiting and seeking hope in a dark time. We know that Christmas will come, and God's presence among us is going to be revealed, but we can't rush that. We have to allow the waiting to elapse according to God's time.
So some part of Advent invites us to see, do we have the courage to sit in the waiting room for a bit? Will we do that? Because Jesus came not to bring us Christmas cheer. That wasn't good enough. He wants us to know Christmas joy. And some part of the path to that joy is through the deep digging into life and into ourselves to find the hope of Advent. That's not easily attained. That's not easily grasped. And sometimes this time of year when we look at the cards and we hear the carols and we see the paintings, there's something about those images that kind of soften the grittiness of what Jesus arrived into. An unwed pregnant woman wondering what would be happening in her life. Her betrothed also wondering. Being in a land occupied by a brutal government that was sending them here and there to be registered. And then upon his birth, a brutal, horrifying king that wanted nothing more than the death of Jesus himself. That was the mutilated world into which he came. And he came there because God wanted us to know something powerful. And that powerful thing is the source of the joy of Christmas and the wonder of it, is that God would do anything for us to know we are not alone.
After 9 hours, they called me in. And I was ushered to a gurney. And they said, let me get a look at that thumb. And they said, oh no, that looks awful. We're going to help you. And they administered IV antibiotics. And they asked me about the trip to Italy. And they said, we wish we could come too. It would be so great, but we're going to stay here and do our job. And I noticed that even though it was late at night, on the counter on the side was where their dinner was, partially eaten, because they didn't have time to take care of themselves. They were busy caring for everybody else, tending to their pain, making sure that they would be okay. And they sent me off with a Band-Aid and a prescription and good wishes to have a great time in Italy. And I learned something that day. I learned that waiting is a lot easier if you do it with a friend. And I was grateful that I had a friend to do that with. And I'm grateful that the waiting room that we're in now, too, has enough room for all of us. That we can do it together. That we don't wait alone. We wait in faith and hope, side by side, until the day when we see with our own eyes that God knows about our pain. Our pain matters to God.